Hello, welcome. Today we're taking a look at the Zastava M92 and M85, specifically talking about suppressing them, because these are, unfortunately, the most popular non-standard AK pattern rifles that we have in the States. So they are a 26mm thread pitch here on the end, and that is distinctly different than the 14x1 or 24mm thread pitch that we have on the AKM and AK-74 respectively. With that in mind, let's talk about exactly what we have going on here, as well as the options and things to consider if you want to talk about suppressing them. So starting with the M92, we have a 10-inch barrel, and then we have a front sight gas block combo that the barrel just barely is recessed behind. So the muzzle is basically right there at the very end. These two are basically in line, and that's the one that most manufacturers of muzzle devices and suppressor adapters are making those adapters for. And then we have the M85, which is the same configuration. It's the same 10-inch barrel. However, you'll notice there's a little bit more barrel here in between the front handguard retainer and the actual gas block combo. And that's because the barrel is actually recessed down in there. There's a good solid half-inch between the crown of the muzzle and the actual end of the front sight gas block combo. So because of that, face-mounted muzzle devices and adapters don't actually natively just work with the M85 if they work with the M92. And I think that a lot of manufacturers don't consider that. So let's actually talk about suppressing these two. I think JMAC is probably the best option for most people, specifically their X37 muzzle device in the 26mm pattern. So this is basically a 26mm left hand to 1 3/8 by 24 thread adapter that also happens to have a brake / flash hider built into it. It's definitely more brake than it is flash hider, but it's better than nothing, and it's less breaky than all of their other muzzle devices. And so on the M92, it actually works perfectly for that one. It's the one that it was obviously designed for. It threads on enough to almost reach the detent, and then it basically bottoms out. And then you can take any hub compatible suppressor and install it on there. It's probably the best, most modular option for most people, and so I think that it's a great contender to be at the top of your list. So let's talk about the M85 and this X37 muzzle device adapter. So JMAC actually made considerations for that. So this is basically a puck. It just extends the muzzle forward enough to get it past the gas block and allow the M85 to face mount. That little puck is just needed to be machined and to be made in exactly the right way and the right size. It's not a complicated piece. It was something that somebody needed to make, and they did. So with that installed, you can actually face mount a suppressor on the M85 despite the barrel being recessed quite a lot in the gas block. So that actually works really well. This is the primary way that I personally suppress my M85. It provides the most reliable way of attaching a suppressor, in my opinion. There are fewer tolerance stacking, and you're actually getting to the muzzle, which I think is really important. That one I think is probably your best option, but there are other options, so let's take a look at those. This JMAC puck will continue to make an appearance because we're going to continue to talk about other suppressors, and for the M85, it is an important piece of kit, in my opinion, to have because it allows you to actually face mount things.
So let's talk about the Dead Air Wolverine. This is the most popular AK-centric suppressor, and Dead Air does have specific provisions for the 26mm thread pitch. That includes a thread adapter as well as a proprietary collar for the 26mm thread adapter. The collar is wholly different than the factory 14x1 collar or even the AK-74 24mm collar. Once you have the required parts, you can use the factory spring to reconfigure the Wolverine and natively install it on the M92, where it will properly face mount and lock up to the detent. The M92 is the one that Dead Air had in mind when making the 26mm adapter, so if that's the only one you've got, then it's a very solid option.
However, when we start talking about the M85, that's where this face mount doesn't quite work the same. Again, because the muzzle is recessed, you can just mount it on, and I'm sure a lot of people do that without really thinking about it too much, and it will work. So let's actually see what that looks like. It will basically bottom out against the front of the gas block itself. However, you're not actually face mounting against the barrel. This is probably fine. The can is overboard. Would this work on the M85? Probably. I'm sure a lot of people run it like this and don't even think about it. But let's see what it actually looks like with the JMAC puck installed and the Wolverine. So with that installed, it actually comes up a little bit shorter because of the additional length that we're adding. And so when we engage the collar, it is a little bit short. The collar is actually a little bit short. It doesn't engage the detent the way that it needs to. It actually freely spins and it doesn't lock the way that it needs to. And that means that it is possible for it to back off when it's in position. So it's not actually able to use the Dead Air locking system that you normally are able to use for an AK. That is a little bit unfortunate. It does work I did shoot it like this and it did work fine. That is an important thing to note. If you do have a dead air Wolverine and you want to run it on an M85, can you do it like this? Yes. Is it locked as securely as it normally is? No, because it doesn't have the length it needs to reach the detent.
JMAC also makes a hub adapter thread insert for the Wolverine, which could be a viable option if that piques your interest.
Next up, I'm going to talk about some proprietary suppressor adapters. I don't have any of these on hand, but I know of at least 3 that are out there. And so if you know of more, you can let me know down below. I'm sure more will come in the future, but for now, I know that
Rearden makes at least 2 26mm face-mounted muzzle devices for the Q Plan B / Atlas QD suppressor mount pattern, specifically the Bliet brake and the Suka flash hider.
And I know that Huxworks also makes a 26mm adapter for their proprietary QD system. So if you have a flow-through can, then that is actually great news. And lastly, JMAC actually makes a chemo adapter. So if you're invested in chemo and you want to stick with that heavy and slightly archaic system, then go for it. But those are the only ones that I currently know of that are out there that are available. Lastly, there is technically one other option, and that is just the thread adapter. So this is 26mm to 5/8 by 24. It does not face mount at all, and it is not a good idea to use as a suppressor mount. For muzzle devices, then yeah, it's fine. I used a 5/8 by 24 30 caliber flash hider for quite some time before my suppressor was approved, and it works fine. It's a way of getting kind of whatever you want on the end of these. I know it's tempting, but do not use this for actually mounting a suppressor. It is just objectively not securely mounted. If I set the rifle down and I hold it so that it doesn't move, I can actually fully wiggle my suppressor around because it is just not attached securely. Is this a way of getting it on there? Yeah. Is this a good idea? No, I would never actually shoot this. I'm not going to risk a suppressor and a tax stamp for the sake of wanting to cheap out and buy a $50 mount as opposed to a $100 mount. It isn't technically an option, and it's fine if you want to use it for just like a muzzle device and whatever, but actual suppressors, no, I would never do that. And you should not either. And that's pretty much it for the Zastava M92 and M85. Both of these are fun guns to suppress. They're a little bit different. They're not as easy as a standard AKM or AK-74, but that's part of what makes them fun. And that's pretty much what I have going on with them. For the M85, I use the X37 muzzle device as well as the puck from JMAC pretty much exclusively. I just sort of leave it on here and then I mount my hub compatible suppressor. And for the M92, because I just recently got my Wolverine cleared, so I'm going to be using it for my M92 if I suppress that one. But do let me know if you have alternate opinions or a different way of suppressing these. That's all the ways that I could come up with and figure out how to possibly suppress them. But I may have missed something. So do let me know. Hopefully you learned something or at least found this interesting. And I will see you next time.